Hey everyone, it's Marvin. Thanks so much for listening to Books and Boba. I just wanted to take a quick second to remind you that Books and Boba just launched our Patreon to help support our future endeavors. Rira and I have been running Books and Boba for the last 6.5 years, and we've always talked about wanting to do more, including expanding our content offerings, being able to go to book events and do more coverage. And so to help us get closer to those ambitions, we started a Patreon to help us grow and to better support books by Asian and Asian American authors. We are offering 2 tiers for our Patreon. The first is our regular Boba member coming in at $3 a month, which will give you access to our brand new Books and Boba Discord server, so you can engage with your fellow Books and Boba Club members and also Rira and myself in real time. This is where we'll be aiming to move the bulk of our book club discussions, but rest assured we'll still have a presence on Goodreads as well. And our premium tier is our Honey Boba member tier, coming in at $5 a month, where in addition to access to our Discord server, you'll also get access to our monthly Boba Chats, a bonus podcast where Rira and I and some guests will get together each month and have a more casual discussion on stuff that may or may not be book related, as well as answer some listener Q&A. Honey Boba members will also have access to a poll to help decide an official Books and Boba book pick once per quarter. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, support Books and Boba on Patreon by going to patreon.com/booksandboba. As always, Rira and I really appreciate your support. All right, thanks for listening, and I'm on with the show.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey, you're listening to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And on this episode, we have another great author interview for you. We're talking with David Yoon, the author of Frankly in Love and his most recent adult fiction novel, Version 0. Rira, it was so great to have David on. I feel like you hear about David Yoon's exploits like all the time these days, right? He has like his YA rom-com career. He's, him and Nicola Yoon, his wife, are like a YA rom-com power couple. And they also have a new publishing imprint with in partnership with Random House.
Yeah, I was super stoked to talk to David, especially since I've met David like 3 times now. And it's like, this is the first time we're having a proper conversation. So it was really nice. We talked about how the internet is evil and tied to capitalism, and how the 1% is terrible, and how race is tied to class in terms of working in technology. Yeah, lots of
deep conversations.
Uplifting, deep conversations.
Yeah, deep conversations about like the late stage capitalism that is the technology world, which are all themes in his book, Version 0, that we had a chance to read, and we're very excited to talk to him about. So yeah, let's get to it. Please enjoy our interview with David Yoon. And hey, we're here with David Yoon, author, and I guess now publisher David Yoon. How's it going?
Yeah.
How are you? Thanks for joining us on Books and Boba.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, we are here to talk about, we're here to talk to David about all his great accomplishments, but also about his newest book, Version 0. But before we get to that, we always like to start, because this is a book club about Asian and Asian American authors, we always like to hear, like, how did you end up becoming an author and publisher? Like, what was your journey like as a writer? Like, was it always something that was part of your life, or something that you discovered later on?
I love this question because for me, it's definitely been something I've always wanted to do. Ever since I was in 3rd grade, I wrote a story and I read it to the class, and they loved it, and they were cracking up, and I was like, I like this feeling. And then I wrote another story and I read it, and it was crickets. And I was like, okay, good feedback. Gonna try to do better. And since then, my favorite classes have been English. My major was in English. I went to grad school for fiction. That's where I met Nicola, my wife.
Yeah.
And we learned about writing, but we didn't learn about the publishing industry. So we spent a lot of years just working our day jobs because they paid really well, and writing in the mornings or at night. Really, our grad school contacts from Emerson College was the way we got to meet agents and people like that. That was our main way of networking. And the more you write, the more you can make your own luck. So when you finally do meet an agent, they're like, well, show me your stuff. You have a bunch of stuff to show them. And so, I mean, I'm fast forwarding, 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
No such thing as overnight success.
No, right?
Yeah. Do you remember what the stories you wrote were as a kid that your classmates liked?
It was actually going to another planet on a rocket ship, and there were like alternate versions of all my classmates, like alien versions. And I just wanted to make people laugh. That's all I wanted to do,
Nice.
was just get a laugh. So my first effort was comedy, I guess.
Wow.
When did you realize that writing was a career? Because I feel like for most kids, and also like especially Asian American kids, writing and the arts is not considered a career. It's like, oh, this is something that you do on the side, and your parents are very like, we sacrifice so much for you. You need to go to med school, law school.
Totally.
I mean, that's a stereotype, but it's rooted in some kind of truth. So what was the moment where you said, oh, writing is a career and I could do this for my life?
I never thought this. Like, it took me forever to think that it could be a career. I mean, me and my brother were both like, we're awesome kids, but we're super nightmare kids, especially for Asian parents. Because they're like, you can be a lawyer, a doctor, go to Princeton, Yale. My brother got into Harvard and then proceeded to study art.
Oh,
And they're like, what the fuck? And I went to UC Berkeley and I was studying English. And they're like, what? They have a business school. And I was like, what is business? And so I was just writing. I just knew I had to do it because I knew if I didn't write, I would get really cranky and I would feel like life was meaningless. Even though I like my job, I actually like working in technology in the internet world. I really like that stuff, but it was nothing compared to the satisfaction of finishing a story or finishing a novel. And that's how I knew that was the real work and I had to keep doing it. So, I went to grad school and my mom was like, okay. And I just kept writing for years and years and years. And it wasn't until one of our good friends from Emerson College, Wendy Wonder, she wrote a book called The Probability of Miracles. And the reason she was able to write that book was because it was like some connection with her yoga teacher, happened to be an agent. And when the agent was like, what kind of stuff do you have? She had stuff to show. That agent turned into Nikki's agent, which led to her publishing Everything, Everything, and The Sun Is Also a Star, both of which became really big hits. And that in turn got me hooked up with an agent. So it all just kind of cascaded. So when our friend Wendy Wonder first got published, that's when the spark was like, hey, we could maybe do this for a living. But we never imagined that we could do it full time. Because lots of writers have day jobs while they're writing, and that's perfectly fine. It's a perfectly awesome way to live. And honestly, that was like only 7 years ago. It was really recently that we realized this.
Getting a movie deal is kind of a big way to make it a living and and quit your day job.
And now you're both kings and queens, like the power couple of YA diverse romance with your new imprint. It sounds like it's been a good 7 years for you.
We've been like super duper lucky. We're super lucky that we had champions at Random House and then later at Penguin, both on the kids side and now on the adult side. I don't know. I think we've just been really fortunate. Like when we brought up to Random House that we wanted to start our own imprint dedicated to, featuring love stories, starring people of color, written by people of color. Barbara Marcus, who's the president of Random House Kids, she was like, okay. And she gave us her full support. This is amazing. And so now we're this little boutique imprint, but we have the backing of the monster machine that is Penguin Random House, literally the largest publishing house in the country. And so been getting manuscripts in, and it's been really awesome to see like just the amount of stories there are out there.
Yeah.
And the amount of demand there is for stories out there. And I think it's great because when I was growing up, man, I had nothing.
I know.
People like, what's your mirror moment? I'm like, I had none. Literally zero.
I mean, it is amazing to see the sheer volume of, I mean, it's still a drop in the bucket, right? In the grand scheme of things. But compared to what we had 10, 20, even maybe like 5 or 7 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And now you have, it's always interesting when we interview authors that are like my age or older, because the story is always like, oh, we didn't have anything growing up. We didn't see anything. And then these days we have kids that are like getting published when they're, not even out of college.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one thing that I've always thought about in terms of Asian diaspora, especially, is we weren't allowed to dream to be artists because that dream wasn't available. We didn't have role models. We didn't have anybody who could do it. And the ones who were doing it were writing like those prestige, like super deep immigrant stories about melancholy and ennui. And now we have so many authors like yourself, like writing about thrillers and love stories and romances and rom-coms. Like, I think that's amazing.
Totally. And like there's I think, what's his name, Mike Chen.
Mike Chen. We've had him on our show. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to meet that guy because I started reading his book, We Could Be Heroes. And I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. It's just superheroes for people who hate superheroes, which is me. But like we didn't have we weren't encouraged to do the arts, and it took me decades to understand why that was. And it really came from a place of love. And that's sort of why my first book, Frankly in Love, which is a YA book, it talked a lot about that. It's like my parents especially, and Frank's parents in the book, they were poor and they wanted to give their kids a better life. And their nightmare was that we would go hungry, Yeah. And that's why they pushed us so hard to get into these lucrative, stable careers. And so it wasn't like you can't be an artist. You can be an artist. It's just we don't want you to starve. And that's where it was coming from. It took me a long, long time to figure out that they really, really meant well and that I should just shut the hell up,
Well, it's nice that we have books for young readers who are going through that. It's like, oh, my parents want me to be a doctor. I hate them. And, they read your book, Frankly in Love. And it's like, oh, actually, no, there's a reason why, my parents want me to go in this route. It's because they do care and they don't want me to starve. And totally. And it's like twofold, because it's like, one, you have a way to communicate to young readers like, hey, like, follow your dreams, but also your parents love you. And also like you have books where it's not just about immigrant pain. Like you can have love stories. And I know like in the past, like we've done this podcast since like 2016, and it's and like
awesome,
I know like early on we were just like, oh yeah, an Asian romantic lead. This is amazing. And now it's like canon.
I mean, I really just wanted to put myself into it because, like, honestly, our daughter, like the birth of our daughter, was a huge motivator. We didn't want to be those parents who are like, follow your dreams, you can do whatever you want, and then proceed to do exactly the opposite. I mean, I worked as a user experience guy in tech for 12 plus years. Nikki was working in finance with the evil empire. I mean, those guys it's horrible people. And the idea of us still working in those jobs, I mean, I really actually love my job, so I wouldn't mind as much. But we couldn't look at our daughter with a straight face and be like, follow your dreams. So it made us work really, really hard to make those dreams come true. I mean, and there's a lot of luck involved too, but yeah.
So yeah, like you just said that you worked in tech for like 20 years, and it shows in your book, version 0. And I gotta say, when I was reading it, I was like, I'm slowly getting depressed because I'm already a pretty cynical person, and I already hate social media. And it's just like, wow, like the internet is evil, and this book is just feeding into my anxiety over privacy and just my hatred for capitalism. So like, my question is like, how long did it take you to write this book? Obviously, you worked in tech for like 20 years. Like, I'm guessing that you kind of like stitched together a lot of ideas that you've had over the years while you were working.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually a little over 12 years that I worked in tech. I started out as a web designer. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We're just slapping crap together. And then we had a more formal discipline, which is interface design, which became user experience, which is not just about what the thing looks like, but also how it behaves and how you attract customers and keep those customers and then track them, you know. And it's about getting the customer to do what they want efficiently in a nice way, but also letting the business get users to do what they want. So there's this push-pull, you know, and there's a lot of like, I don't want to say mind control, but like there's a psychological aspect to it. You know, I worked in social media and in cybersecurity, and I worked in ad tech and also advertising, but ad tech is different. Ad tech is the technology that creates the profile. It scrapes the data to create a profile of you so that it can serve you the ads that it thinks are best. And I worked in one of these companies, and we were coming up with new and exciting ways to gather new types of data, and also new and exciting ways to shove ads in front of your face. And these were smart, like really good people. They just were nerds and they wanted to make cool stuff. And all of us to a single person had proxies and ad blockers installed on all of our devices. So like, I like to say that we were exactly the non-smokers working at Philip Morris. Like it was exactly that kind of paradox. And I was like, once you realize that, you're like, oh my God, there's all kinds of paradoxes in tech. Like we used to say, I'm not a number, I'm a human being. And yet we place all this emphasis on our follower counts and our like counts. And not only that, we enjoy it. That's the surprise to me, is that it's not like a grudging thing. Like we actually enjoy it. We get a dopamine hit from it. The same thing with like hashtags. We always used to say, you can't categorize me and stick me in a box. And we're literally putting ourselves in little boxes to make ourselves easier for the algorithm to find. And we're enjoying that too. So it's like a major shift in how we think about this ourselves as like sovereign individuals. And I don't actually know what it is. I can't define it. All I know is that I know how I grew up, which seems like totally like free range compared to now. And I miss it.
This comes up in your book too, because your main character, Max, is a son of two undocumented immigrants, and his parents work in factories and create physical goods. And, you know, a theme throughout the book is this idea that the world of tech doesn't create anything tangible, right? And so like there's this saying that the product is free because the product is the customers, right? It's their data, it's everything that they willingly put on that platform for you to, you know, package and sell to on paper advertisers, but who knows who they're really selling that data to, right?
Oh yeah, that's very true. And when I was working in ad tech, you know, we'd say like our male age 20 to 30 sports fan is way higher quality than this other company's male 20 to 30 sports fan, because we have finer granular, and we talk about it like it was drugs. Like we would combine data from many different sources and chop it and mix it, and then we'd sell it as a cocktail. You know, this is what Max is up against, because number one, Max he's a son of immigrants, and like all kids of immigrants, his parents don't understand him, and he doesn't feel like he belongs in any particular place. And so as a result, he kind of dives into technology because technology represents for him a chance to make his own context, make a place for himself to belong. And he falls in love with it, and he actually becomes like really idealistic, and he thinks that technology will make the world a better place. And so he gets really good at it, and he works for this company called Ren. It's a fictitious social media giant. And he discovers that they're doing shady stuff with user data, and he blows the whistle because he's a good kid. And he immediately gets fired, immediately gets blacklisted in the industry. And he has this crisis of faith because what he believed in is suddenly not there anymore. And so he embarks on this mission. He forms a hacker group called Version Zero, and they embark on this mission to expose the big five tech companies for their sins against humanity, you know, through like this escalating series of hacks that get crazier and crazier.
Yeah.
And that's because it was so personal to him. That was his utopia, that he was trying to build his own identity within. And it turned out to be nothing more than a capitalist playground for VCs with way too much money and time on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, your story definitely has a certain point of view at all the money interests that go into tech and what they're looking for. Yeah. I mean, I love that you include a quote in the beginning, "Don't be evil," which for a lot of people who might not remember, was the motto of Google until it mysteriously disappeared from their documents, like at one point, like X number of years ago. Because
they couldn't very well cross out the don't. Just say be evil.
Yeah. And like, it's interesting because, yeah, I have a lot of friends who do work at these, Silicon Valley companies, and they just want to make cool stuff. The idea that technology can make the world a better place is kind of the ideal. But then you realize that like the people controlling how that money is actually made, it's still a corporation. The corporation is still fundamentally detached from morality, right? I mean, that's the main flaw of capitalism that we found, especially late stage capitalism, is the social promises just aren't there because it's just a select few who hold the capital to make things happen, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I was listening to Ted Chiang, fellow Asian American author Ted Chiang, who I just worship the ground he walks on. And he was saying that capitalism and technology are so tightly intertwined that you can't really separate them. And especially when you have this sort of pure space of abstraction called the internet, and billions of dollars in venture capital just kind of sitting there waiting to be spent on social experiments. It really is, it's a perfect recipe for what my other friend was calling neoliberal socialism, which is like, so just put it in plain terms, like let's turn everyone to a cab driver and let's call it, Uber. And let's just throw a bunch of money on it. We don't know if it's going to work. Who cares? We have tons of money. Let's play around and see what happens. All these drivers get paid really well because the business is not making money, and it still doesn't make money. But what's happening is all this money is trickling down from the venture capitals to these normal everyday drivers, and they're getting a sort of living wage on this illusion. This thing that's it's not even capitalism. It's a socialist experiment. So that's why we call it neoliberal capitalism.
All the while the executives take like 80% cut of that money from venture capital. This isn't a podcast about economics or business, but
you say that, but I feel like in almost every other episode we bring up capitalism and how much we hate it.
It is the big bad of our era for sure. And like, really we either want to bring it down or we want to solve it, right? If it's even possible to be solved. And what I enjoyed about your book is it reads like one part thriller, but also one part like Michael Lewis-esque like explanation of like this industry that you go in depth about what exactly internet companies do and how they make money, and they make money off of their customers, and and also what they're willing to overlook to make that money, because cyberbullying comes up in your book. Bad people who can exploit the anonymity and the the ease of access of technology to do bad things, and that companies are willing to overlook it because dealing with it will cost money, and that would make their shareholders mad, right? That's their goal.
I mean, I was writing this book when the ethnic genocides in Myanmar were happening, and those were absolutely fueled by Facebook, and Facebook turned a blind eye. They could have helped stop it, but they didn't, because their investors would have been like, "What's going on here? Your KPIs are slipping," and it's just. It's sort of because tech is so intertwined with capitalism, and capitalism predicates itself on infinite growth, which nothing in nature grows infinitely. So why would you expect us to be able to pull that kind of thing off? And it would happen to me too. Like when I was just kind of sitting around in the office shooting the shit with my coworkers, we're all nerds, so all we're talking about are app ideas. And I sort of took one of these experiences and modeled it for a scene in the book where Max. He just wants to help his friend Shane, whose girlfriend he happens to be madly in love with, and is like love sick because he can't do anything about it. But
it's pretty complicated. Yeah,
it's complicated. But his friend Shane has a pool cleaning business, and he's like, I can turn this into an app service, like an Uber for pool cleaning. And they don't want to make a ton of money; they just want to make enough. And when they bring it to investors, the investors are like, this is not enough money. It needs to scale bigger. How about you? And then they start going down the road of how about user data? How about we sell we sell that stuff. How about you turn it into a data collection service and then lose money on the actual pool cleaning service? And Max is like, no, that's what I'm running away from. I want to do the internet correctly and fairly and in a way that makes actual sense and at a scale that's a little more human. And he fails. He has to quit. And that would happen to me and my buddies all the time. We'd come up with an app idea, like a photo sharing idea. And our other friends who are armchair VCs, not actual VCs, they'd be like, well, how will it scale? And every time we'd be like, sell user data. And that's kind of all roads lead to Rome, you know?
Yeah.
And so that a lot of the book was really inspired by that. But at the same time, I got to tell you, I wanted to write it as if it were a comedic dystopia, like Idiocracy, which I love, because it is a comedic dystopia that we're living in. I mean, it's funny. There's a lot of stuff that is so weird and so kind of awful that all there is to do really is laugh at it. There's actually too many examples of memes and trends on TikTok and what our phones have us doing that are just really absurd and ripe for comedy. And so I really wanted to make sure the book was not only fast-paced, like short chapters and a thriller plot, but also really funny, because I laugh at everything. I think everything's funny and also tragic at the same time.
One of the things I found really funny about your book was your character, Brayden, the Gen Z kid who he's part of a generation where like the internet already existed by the time he was born. And when you're introduced to him, he is not going outside. He's just glued to his phone and his game console. And that is all he needs to socialize. And just a lot of the explanations he comes up with when Max and his team is like, we broke the internet. So why are people like doing this? Like, why are people going in willingly to like sell their data? And why are they giving up their privacy? And Brayden's like, we don't care about that. We just want attention. And that's all that matters. And I was like, wow. I mean, it's very sad and depressing, but it's also very funny because he's a kid and you're just like, oh, naive child, like sweet summer child.
So there is a part in the book where like, so first of all, like they start doing these hacks and they get the attention of this reclusive billionaire tech mogul who just kind of dropped out of the scene. And turns out the reason he dropped out, when he talks to Max and he's like, I dropped out because I hated the world that I built. It made him lose his daughter, made him lose his wife and his family. And he wants to exact revenge alongside Max to sort of atone for his life's mistakes. And also he has billions of dollars. So he lets them pull off these amazing hacks that, no mortals could do. He has his own agenda that Max doesn't quite know about. So that's another part of the story. But one of the hacks they pull off is they get rid of all the likes. There are no more likes anymore. And people freak out and they immediately want them back. And that's when Brayden is saying the stuff you're saying. We're like, no, I need to be quantified and validated through this extremely cheap through this extremely cheap currency called likes. And his point of view actually was really inspired by my own nephew. He's 16 now, but he is immersed he was born in the internet. He doesn't know anything else. And a lot of kids are growing up in one of the biggest social experiments ever, and what do you do when you have kids who primarily socialize on Fortnite or Among Us? I mean, I see him doing it and I'm glad he could do it, especially during pandemic. But I was asking him, how do you make VR more social? Because it's so antisocial. And he's like, well, you could have someone else with a headset and then be in the same room together. And I was like, or you could take the fucking headsets off and just be in a room together. But and he's not like a bad kid. He's not like a dumb kid. He's extremely brilliant and he's got a really good heart. But I worry for him because I've been hearing stats about this Gen Z, and they're less interested in things like sex. They're less interested in romantic relationships or having kids because they've seen the world mediated through a flat rectangle, and all of their other senses are sort of atrophying. The senses that you would normally build in a social setting or just hanging out in the same room together, just kind of doing nothing. The stuff that like I grew up with, running around town until the streetlights came on. This generation is the total opposite. So, and I'm wondering what impact that's going to have on them.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about this past year where there's probably a generation of like toddlers right now who are seeing the outside world outside of their home for the first time ever. From coming into consciousness, right? And the fact that there are kids like this was a question posed to me in grad school once, which is like planning for a generation where knowledge is detached from learning, right? Like, what do you do when everything you need to know can be looked up on Wikipedia, right? So there's no reason to retain facts and knowledge because you can just look it up. Like, and then what do you remember then? Like, how do you think about knowledge and what do you remember in that case? And I don't know. Yeah.
We're thinking about creativity too. Me and Nikki were talking about this. We're like, creativity used to be you had to learn how to paint and manipulate a brush and choose materials and whatever. And now it's choosing filters. But here's the thing. I mean, we laugh at it, but like it is a valid form of creativity for very young people. Like they will see something you created just with presets on some app and they'll be like, oh, it's amazing. You're so creative. And it makes you wonder, like, what is creativity? Before my generation, they had a very high bar for creativity.
Yeah.
You know, you had to make all kinds of stuff. So they probably would have been like, oh, you just bought a paintbrush? I had to make that, you know?
I mean, like with kids on social media these days, I'm genuinely impressed by some of the TikTok videos that come out. I'm just like, wow, you guys have like dancing and editing skills. That must have taken like 3 hours to make and it's only 30 seconds long. And like I'm a little bit younger than Marvin. So like my generation was we didn't have the internet until like late middle school or high school. And it was like the social experiment of like of our parents saying like, don't talk to strangers on the internet, but we all talk to strangers on the internet.
It's nothing but strangers.
Yeah. And it's like really funny because like now kids are just like, let's talk to all of the strangers on the internet. Let's live stream all of our lives and have it on display. And that wasn't really part of the original plan when it came to the internet. I mean, but also like, there are some good things about the internet that still, you know, it's like, I feel like it does help with socialization because for me, friends that I've made on like forums, like 10, 15 years ago, I'm still friends with them. I'm actually going to a wedding for someone that I met on the internet. And we've only met like 3 times in person. So it's like, you can retain relationships. It's just a different set of social skills that you need to cultivate.
That's very true. And what you're saying is kind of related to something that Braden mentions, where it's like kids are developing, I think, out of a sense of self-preservation, 2 sets of personas. You know, there's the public set, and then there's a private. So public is on Instagram, Facebook, although no one's on Facebook, or on TikTok, and the private is on like Discord. Or just texting a group chat. And so you've got your 2 personas there and they understand that you don't do stuff on main that you would normally do on like on Discord, which is like a more trusted environment and a more intimate friends only type of environment. So I have some faith that they're learning how to manage their personas, but there's other stuff just like 4chan and just unfettered, unlimited access to any kind of porn at any age is like that is deeply disturbing to me and has so many huge implications on like just human relationships that I don't know. The one of the big questions that version 0, it is a thriller. It's got a lot of comedy in it because, you know, me, I can't help with comedy and stuff. And it's got a lot of romance in it because, you know, Max is really lovesick. But in the end, what it's trying to do is ask the question or answer the question. After all this time, has the internet actually been worth it? You know, and I think the book, in its own way, answers the question. But I want readers to just think about it. I want them to think about like what do we give up willingly in exchange for the privilege of using technology, and what does that mean for you as an individual? What does that how does that change your definition of yourself?
Yeah. It's a question we should ask ourselves every time we hit agree on one of those end user license agreements, right?
Yeah, I take it
Yeah.
with like a grain of salt whenever I say agree. I'm just like, they already have my data anyway. Like, does it
Oh
matter
yeah.
if it's like another company that has my data? But yeah, like I did want to like mention like race is kind of like a big deal in your book. I've noticed that like you have characters who are like white man or
Yeah.
Asian, and your main character is Salvadoran, and it's mentioned like a couple times. I just wanted to ask like why that was important to write into the prose to like
Um,
specify the races of all of these characters.
it's because it's something I really noticed in tech, and any other industry, you could sort of just be like, whatever. This is just garden variety American caste system, American racial caste system. But in tech, it's I thought it was worth calling out because tech always bills itself as this purely meritocratic, democratic society. It was founded, by people like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who were both hippies. Um, and so you had hippie counterculture, which was also extremely white for all of its talk about universality. It was very white culture. And that met tech, and that became the early Silicon Valley. And then that met venture capital and giving us the Silicon Valley of today. But it still has a weird foot in like utopian thinking, where like we can escape the bonds of all these preconceived notions about ourselves and who we're supposed to be, and we can build our own reality, kind of like that declaration of cyberspace, which I think I found that was really funny. Like I think that's one of the funniest historical documents ever written, and it makes me crack up every time I read it. But yeah, so like if you're going to say that tech can make all of us free and we're all equal because all that matters is how good you are at tech and what you build for yourself online, why, when you go to a typical tech company, is it so racially stratified? You would think that it would be just kind of everybody everywhere, but it's not. And so I wanted to call it out for that reason. And also for the reason that you just don't see a lot of Latinos working in tech, like virtually none. And it was every company I went to over 12 plus years, I saw like a tiny handful. And I was like, what is that? Um, it just pointed out that the internet was very much English speaking at the start. It was very much Anglophilic, American, like white American. And so the technology had a bias in the very beginning. And I figured I'd point that out by literally building a pyramid that people lived on, like a caste pyramid.
I think that's like very true that race is tied to class, and we've definitely seen it in the pandemic. Like there are kids who come from families where they don't have reliable internet connection, and we don't even think about it as like a privilege. It's like, oh, the internet's free. Like anybody can access it, but it's like, no, actually like lower income families, they have to like their kids have to like go to McDonald's to get like free internet. Like they can't access the same level of education that a lot of upper middle class white families and even Asian families have access to. So yeah, definitely like technology has ties to capitalism and to classism. And that's what I found like really interesting. And that's why I asked the question about why you decide to put race as like a factor.
I mean, totally. And the classic example is the facial recognition software.
Oh my God, those scare me so much.
But I mean, it has trouble with Black people. It was not built by Black people. If it were built by Black people, it would have absolutely no problem with recognizing Black people. I can guarantee that. So the bias is it's so glaring that to not call it out, I think it just wouldn't be as smart of a book. And I really wanted to write something smart and thoughtful.
Yeah. So how has the response been so far for version 0?
I mean, people seem to really, really like it. Like they've been calling it really fast paced and really fun to read, and like they couldn't put it down, which is like such high compliments because I worked my butt off to make it that way, to make it like. I mean, I deliberately wrote really, really short chapters, even really, really short sentences. I was sort of trying to channel George Saunders and Blake Crouch, who wrote Dark Matter, which I worship that book. But also have some of that Ted Chiang smart in there. and some of that Margaret Atwood smart, that I just worship her too. So yeah, the reception's been good, and mostly people are approaching it like they've been asking me questions like what do you think? Has the internet been good or bad? And I can't answer that.
Yeah,
And
no one can answer that.
My other favorite is like, how can we protect ourselves? What are some tips on protecting yourself on the internet? And I'm like, there are none, and you can't.
Yeah. You can be as careful
you
as
have
possible.
tips in the book. There are chapters where it's like, oh, here are 5 ways to protect yourself if your cab driver is like a crazy person. And it's like, well, you already called the cab on the app. Like you're doomed from the beginning. None of these tips are useful. And yeah, like there's no way to protect yourself from the internet. Sorry, you guys. Like that's just the truth. We're doomed.
I mean, the big point is just I want people to be aware that we've signed into this contract, and we continue to sign into it every day, and the contract is part of the larger paradox that is capitalism. We're back to capitalism.
Yeah.
But I wrote this essay that I'm still working on, and it's called like How to Live a Hypocrisy-Free Life. And I mean, the answer is you can't.
It's hard.
Yeah, back in the day, we were like, divest in South Africa, end apartheid, or don't buy Domino's pizza because they're pro or they're anti-abortion, and that seems funny now because our hypocrisy. We support companies that do bad things all the time, every day, especially now that so many companies are involved in data warehousing, internet exchanges, and just code libraries that are all baked into. So one app can rely on 20 different companies in order just to simply function. And there's no way you can keep track of what each company is doing.
Yeah.
And so the scale and speed at which we're interacting with an ever-growing web of capitalist companies is too much for one person to even do anything about.
Yeah. This comes up in your book a lot when you're addressing the many flaws of like how modern day society operates, and it's like the central concept of just economics and game theory, which is like people will do whatever is best for them. And so you have to assume everyone is out for themselves. And the corporations have figured out a way to, game that and get you to do what they want because they know they know everyone has that like central need, right? Yeah,
that's true. But at the same time, like I'm trying not to judge too harshly because we have, on the other hand, we have this impulse for good. We have it's Pride Month, and like LGBTQIA plus rights have never been higher. And that's a great sign. So we have this impulse that we should be fair and we should treat each other like humans. And I think that is sort of our primal selves. Like we understand each other when we're in small groups and we can look at each other in the eye and we can use our body language to talk. But as soon as we, like cars are a great example, as soon as we take millions of us and put ourselves into metal containers, and erase our names and erase our faces and become vehicles and also give people tremendous speed, then we wind up with road rage. It brings out something bad in us. But I do think that we have an instinct toward good as well, because we know if we don't look out for each other, we're doomed. I don't know who's going to win out.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what the book is focused on too.
Yeah, I mean, good fiction asks those hard questions that have no answers. People should stop asking David about what is the right answer here.
I just want to be like, there's a love story and a bunch of shit blows up. Go read it.
That's a very apt description. Yeah.
Speaking of love story, I do want to ask, how was it? Because you're probably better known as a YA rom-com author. How was it to write your first like adult fiction novel?
Well, this is funny. Like I actually started this book before Frankly in Love. Oh. And Frankly in Love is like super wholesome, super sweet. It starts out as a rom-com and it goes into some like family drama stuff. And my second book, which is Super Fake Love Song, that was even sweeter and more innocent. Like it was about this total insecure nerd who just fakes it till he makes it so he can impress a girl by being a rock star. I mean, it's like super sweet. I actually started version 0 before any of that. And it started out as kind of this thought piece on this was back when there were all those like 1%, 99% protests happening. Was it Zuccotti Park? Zuccotti
Yeah,
Plaza?
Occupy Wall Street, right?
Occupy Wall Street, yeah. And it was just sort of this general, like, rich people, 1%, poor people, 99%. Why do we do this? Why do we hoard money and render it useless? When you actually amass wealth, it gets taken out of circulation and becomes useless, which Margaret Atwood wrote. And my wife, Nicola, she was like, this is all great, but it's just ideas. Can you make it into people? Can you make it personal? And I was like, oh, you're so right. I suck. And I was like, well, I worked in tech. Tech is all capitalism. That's very personal. So I changed the whole story and redrafted it to be, something that was closer to my heart. And that allowed in elements like the love triangle and the reclusive billionaire as a surrogate father figure for Max, stuff like that. So it actually taps into stuff I'm just naturally interested in. I'm very much interested in love. Like, I think love is the thing that makes the world go around. I think without love, we're just insects. I don't know, maybe insects love. I don't want to presume. Sorry, insects.
Did you think that you had to write Frankly in Love and Super Fake Love Song first in order to like build up your craft to write version 0? Because version 0 is like very ambitious in terms of ideas, like you said. And I feel like with like Frankly in Love, like it seemed more personal. So like I don't know. Like, do you think those two books like prepared you enough like to complete version 0?
I love that you asked that, and the answer is absolutely yes. Because it's so easy when you're writing about big ideas to just focus on the ideas, and then your book becomes cold. It's not as human. And the thing that I learned writing Frankly in Love and Super Fake Love Song, and also that I learned just living with one of my favorite writers in the world, Nicola Yoon, her whole deal is your stories must have emotional logic. They can't have like mechanical logic and intellectual logic. The characters must do things that make sense for them, even if they're bad people or they're making a mistake. It has to make sense to them, and I really admire that. So I worked out a lot of stuff with in Frankly in Love. The first draft, like, everyone gets along, there's no problems. It was not very interesting. And same with Super Fake. I have a tendency to write stories, first drafts, where like everyone's okay with each other, and you're like, why am I reading this? There's no problem being solved. And so it absolutely prepared me to make like version 0 much more like a story about people and about comedy and all the stuff that makes us human, and not just about ideas. Because otherwise, it's like you're eating steamed vegetables. It's not great.
I guess, as we wind down this interview, and thank you so much again, David, for joining us on Books and Boba. For people who want to pick up this book, what's something that you want them to, I guess, keep in mind as they read through the story of Max, Shane, and Akiko?
Well, I mean, mostly I just want them to be aware of, like we were talking about before, when the product is free, the product is actually you, and you are giving up part of yourself for the privilege of using technology. And just being aware of like, why are you using like TikTok, for example? Why do you feel compelled to get a bunch of likes for doing a quick change lip sync? What are you getting out of that? And why are you motivated to chase that? And also, is it that the trend is happening because it's a trend, or is it because TikTok engineered the trend and is sort of telling you what you should want in the first place? And if TikTok didn't exist, I'm just picking on TikTok, I don't know why, but
it's the new thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, how would you know yourself what to want if you didn't have that online context? And if let's say the internet turned off one day, what would you do with your day? How would you define what you wanted to do? Not just what you did, but what you decided to want to do.
Yeah, I think those are pretty deep questions. And I feel like depending on how old you are and your relationship to social media, your answer will be different. But But thank you so much, David. This was such a fun and insightful talk. I feel like we covered so much in the span of 1 hour.
It's been a journey.
Yeah. Before we go, what's next for you? What's in the pipe?
Well, I'm pretty busy with Joy Revolution manuscripts. We have 3 books in the pipeline, which we're really excited about. And I sold another book recently called City of Orange to my same editor, Mark Tavani, who published Version 0. That one's a post-apocalyptic psychological thriller about a guy who wakes up with no memory. He just knows that he needs to find his wife and kid and make sure they're okay. And that doesn't have a release date yet, but it'll be probably next year. And just working on other stuff. There's always writing happening in the Yoon household. So,
yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. Yes, the almighty Yoon household of writers. David, if people want to follow your thoughts online, where can they go? After we've talked all about how we should do online things less, where can we find your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you can always go to my site. It's just davidyoon.com. I did just start a Substack because I just wanted to try it. Everyone's like, Substack, it's way better than MailChimp. So I'm like, okay. But that's a place I've been writing these how-to guides that aren't really how-to guides. You'll see when you read them. And I have been publishing a couple 2-3 essays. There's one in the LA Times, and there's one on LitHub under their crime read section. And I think there should be another one coming out soon. And that's talking more about like our relationship with capitalism and the internet and mental hoarding, how our brains are actually houses that we live in and we should treat them as such, stuff like that. So, but the hub for everything is just davidyoon.com.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us on Books and Boba, and I hope we'll talk soon. Like we'll definitely bring you back on next time you have something cool happen. So,
I would love that. This is great. Thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like we could have talked for hours about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, David. And that was David Yoon, the author of Version 0, which is now available at booksellers everywhere. Also check out his other more YA rom-com friendly fare, Frankly in Love and Super Fake Love Song, also available at booksellers everywhere. Rira, that was a fun conversation.
Yeah. Even those depressing topics, I had a lot of fun talk. You know me, I love talking about the evil of capitalism and, how much I hate social media.
I think it's great that we have authors that are exploring these topics, because sometimes it's great to have a book to point them towards, to say, you want to learn about why the internet is bad or why you need to be careful on the internet? Here's a book, read it. It has explosions in it. Also, there's a love triangle, but also you can learn about the internet. All right. Rira, remind us what we're reading for the month of June.
So for the month of June, we are reading Happy Endings by Tien Kim Lam. It is a sexy rom-com about a Vietnamese American businesswoman who runs a sex toy shop. And it's a second chance romance, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to hear Marvin's thoughts on it.
Yeah, we'll also be discussing this with Jess Ju and Han Lin, who are co-hosts for my other podcast, Good Pop, and they are both big romance novel fans as well. So I will be thoroughly outnumbered during this book club discussion, but it should be fun. I'm looking forward to a spirited conversation about the relative points of this story.
Don't be scared, Marvin.
And so with that, thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Books and Boba. Thank you to David Yoon for joining us for a great author interview. Rira, I'll see you next time.
Great. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.